Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It is March 10th, 2024. I'm your host, Nate Pike. Got a lot to talk about. We've had 2 weeks off, but not really, because we've been putting up lots and lots of episodes, but we haven't done a live episode per se in about 2 weeks. So we're back, and we're going to be doing the live episode thing again for the next hour or six. Hard to say for sure, but want to throw a little reminder up at the top end of the show that if you're one of those folks that disagrees with something that's said here tonight, or you have something that you want to bring up that we maybe didn't cover quite so much, then you can absolutely join us on the Twitter Spaces or X Spaces. I'm still going to keep calling it Twitter. You can join us on the Twitter Spaces, and after we've done the program proper, then you can weigh in with your thoughts. We're going to do tonight a little bit differently. Because historically what we've done is we've turned on a bit of a fire hose for 10 to 15 different topics. And there's 3 or 4 topics that we really want to make sure that we hit on with some depth. So we're going to be talking about a few things tonight. We're going to be talking about the changes to, alleged changes to how counselors are going to be regulated in the province of Alberta, and what the current status of that is. Spoiler alert, it's not good. It's not a good current status at all. We're going to be talking about the big news. One of the big newses this week, which was the RCMP investigation into the 2017 UCP Leadership Race wrapped up, and with more of a whimper than a bang. But there's some interesting implications in that we're going to talk about tonight, and then we're going to also be talking about in our next episode. We'll get to that in a bit. And then we're going to be talking about the drug plan, because we had yesterday another episode of Your Province, Your Premier, and Danny said some things, which is also going to lead us into our conversation about coal mines tonight. So we got a lot we're going to be covering. We're going to start with, though, the situation with counselors in the province of Alberta. So some things you got to know right out of the gates, because it gets to be really important really quick, is that as of right now in the province of Alberta, there is no regulation for who can call themselves a counselor. It's not a protected title. Literally anybody can call themselves a counselor. Now, this has been an issue that has been going on for quite a few years. And we got to go back in time a little bit to get the full context. But the really important takeaway is that right now, literally anybody, if please don't, if you're not trained, don't do that. But if you were an unscrupulous, perhaps, individual, or maybe a bit of a narcissist, you could say, you know what, I'm going to be a counselor from now on. I'm going to start Timmy's counseling service. And with no credentials, no training, you could call yourself a counselor, and you could charge people money to do that, which isn't great, because there's a lot of ways that can cause some real harm. Now, this issue has been raised for quite a while, and 2018 was the first time that any government really took some concrete steps to address it. So in 2018, the Association of Counseling Therapy of Alberta was set up after the NDP government passed Bill 30, which was the Mental Health Services Protection Act. That was in December of 2018. And that organization was set up, and it was supposed to kind of do build the foundation of a College of Counseling Therapy of Alberta. You may remember in 2019, we got us a new government, and they kind of said, yeah, you know what? We got war rooms to fund and Bigfoots to hunt, so we're not going to put any time or effort into regulating who gets to be a counselor. It recently made the news again because there is a physician who allegedly, I have to say, because the story corrected themselves later down the road, but according to the College of Physicians, they abused someone quite badly, and they lost their license over that situation. Now, this former physician says, no, it wasn't like that, but the physicians body said, yes, it was, and we're not going to let you practice medicine anymore. And apparently she said, fine, I'll be a counselor then. So she is practicing up north as a addictions counselor, which is kind of alarming on a lot of different levels, because you might think to yourself, hey, if somebody has a history of taking advantage of vulnerable Albertans as a physician, a change of title so that they continue to be around vulnerable Albertans maybe isn't the best choice. But like I said earlier, there's no regulation that exists to say you can't do that. And it's important to realize that when we're talking about healthcare professions, the vast majority of them are regulated by colleges. There are professional associations that exist to say, hey, these are the rules. This is the minimum credentials you have to be in order to call yourself this thing. This is the training that you have to do every year in order to continue to call yourself this thing. It's a whole big administrative thing, because when you're talking about people who are dealing with healthcare, whether it's physical healthcare or mental healthcare, you're dealing with some people who have some vulnerabilities. And so making sure that people have the appropriate credentials and the training and are staying current with those things is a really, really important piece. Now, the College of Counseling Therapy of Alberta was supposed to be the organization that was set up through the legislation, the Mental Health Services Protection Act. The UCP didn't do it. There have been a lot of people calling for a college, and those cries have recently gotten quite a bit louder. Treaties 6 and 7 recently stepped up and said, hey, with all of the addictions stuff that's going on, with all the funding that's going into treating addictions, we probably should have some guidelines for who is able to do addictions counseling. Well, there was a development. On March 1st, the province announced a new approach, which is to say, in a stunning display of bipartisan. No, I'm just kidding. They trashed the whole NDP plan. The UCP just said, no, we're not going to do the NDP thing. We're going to start over from scratch because despite the fact that there have been years of work that have gone into building an appropriate framework, we just don't want to say that the NDP did anything well at all. So we're going to reboot the whole thing. So the plan that was announced by Dan Williams, who that's the same Dan Williams that chugged beer in the legislature, just so we're all on the same page. The plan that was announced by Dan Williams is that they're going to move counselors to the College of Psychologists. And in an upcoming legislative session, they're going to repeal the legislation that was brought forward by the NDP but was never actually proclaimed. And they're going to introduce new regulations to take effect in 2025. But there are some concerns. There's some people who are worried because when Dan Williams was asked, you say, hey, so you've said that you're going to do therapist counselors, but there's a lot of other different types of counseling that exist. How are you going to manage that? And his response was, in effect, to basically say, we'll just fold them all in. I don't know why all these different subspecialties get their own recognition, which is a fascinating stance to take because anybody who has worked in healthcare, anybody who has worked in any sort of mental health supports will tell you that they are very, very different and they do require different levels of training, different levels of certification, ideally, not currently in the province of Alberta, but one would hope, and they should have different requirements. But Dan just wants to throw them into the College of Alberta Psychologists and hope for the best. What could possibly go wrong? Moving on from there, we got to talk about the biggest story of the week. The RCMP investigation into the 2017 UCP Leadership Race. On Thursday, they announced that they were going to have a press conference. They gave a full 24 hours of notice to say, hey, we're going to have this press conference. Y'all want to get ready. We don't normally do this. And it's true. The RCMP don't normally hold press conferences unless charges are going to be placed, unless people are getting charged. So everybody was like, ooh, what's going on? And in the release, it also said that it was of intense public interest, high-profile case. A lot of people went, there's only one or two things that could be. And a lot of people were speculating right out of the gates. It turns out correctly that it was going to do with the investigation into the UCP leadership race. But despite giving the media 24 hours of heads up in regards to, hey, we're going to be having this press conference, they had some problems. We're gonna play you about 2 minutes of clip here because it's just too good not to. But for context, by way of context, when the RCMP released their statement, they provided a YouTube link. And they said, if you want to watch the live stream, because you can't get there in person, because it's in Edmonton, then you know what? Hey, here's a live stream link. You can watch it. And so at 10:45, when the probably a little bit before 10:45, when the press conference was supposed to go live, people started tuning in. But what they got wasn't a press conference. It was roughly 20 minutes. Don't worry, we're not going to play the whole 20 minutes, but it was roughly 20 minutes of this.
One more time. Check it one more time. One more time? Yeah. That's good.
So I guess, are they saying at your end that the sound is no good at the podium, but it's okay at the camera?
Yeah, like I've got, so the thing I can't figure out is HDMI. Yeah. And yesterday I tested it.
It worked fine.
Yeah, and the thing is that I can't select
So it might be
inputs.
It might be right at your computer or something.
Well, it's YouTube. Yeah. That's my life. This is what happens to me.
It worked fine yesterday and doesn't work today, right? Yeah, I know.
Yeah, that's why I understand why it's not working today.
Right.
So it's like a YouTube thing.
Okay, this is your receiver. And your transmitter's back there.
Four, five. Microphone check. Everybody good?
It went on for like 20 minutes. It was fantastic. And it, in and of itself, it's not a great look. It's not a great look when you call a press conference and then you air not one, not two, but three different live streams where you're talking about the investigation into the 2017 UCP Leadership Race. But when you take into consideration that the investigation was in no small part centered around electronic voter fraud, and you spend 20 minutes broadcasting your inability to live stream, that's not great for instilling confidence. But it wasn't the first time that there were issues with this investigation instilling confidence. I just want to add before we get to the next bit, there was this little thing that happened here where during the live stream, and we've made it very, very small so you can't read any of the things, they streamed out what appears to be an RCMP desktop with a bunch of investigative documents on it. So that's cool too. Nothing to worry about here. But they did have problems earlier in the investigation when they had they'd gone to somebody's house to have an interview. They'd gone to interview a key Kenny organizer. And as is the fashion, they were going to record the interview using voice recorders, presumably of the digital variety. And then they left them there at the person's house for days. Now, if it had just been the voice recorders had only that Kenny organizer on, I mean, it's embarrassing, but it wasn't just the Kenny organizer, allegedly. It was also a boatload of other interviews that had been done with other people who were involved in the investigation. So not a super strong showing to start off with into the investigation. But they made their announcements, and they wanted to talk first about the Jeff Callaway campaign. And this is probably the most confusing clip, aside from the 20-25 minutes of it's a YouTube problem. This is probably the most confusing clip of the entire press conference.
Colleagues down in Calgary and CBC, they did obtain a number of documents that showed a really close connection between the Callaway and Kenny campaign, including a date for Mr. Callaway to drop out of the race. And I know you don't want to get too much into the details when you haven't laid charges, but what would be the standard for, what would have to take it to lay that charge?
Yeah, so the best thing I would advise anyone who's interested in that question is to look at the criminal code, look at section 380, and of course, you're not lawyers, I'm not a lawyer, so getting advice from someone who's an expert in that area can have an opinion. What I can say to you is that for us to lay a charge, we need to believe that there are reasonable grounds for all the elements of that offense. It is not, unlike a fraud involving selling a vehicle that you don't own or a house you don't own, you have to prove, which requires intent as well, knowledge and intent. We found no evidence in our conversations and interviews, and we had cooperation from the candidates that there was not a willingness to take on the leadership role if Mr. Callaway had won the election leadership contest. And that is very, very relevant to whether or not this would have been a fraud under the criminal code.
Okay, so let's see if we can unpack that just a little bit. Because Jeff Callaway would have been willing to be the leader if he had won, even though his campaign was allegedly coordinating very, very closely with the Kenney campaign. And as that reporter pointed out, the Kenney campaign actually provided the date that Callaway was to drop out and endorse Kenney, despite all of the evidence that there was significant coordination between the two campaigns. If, I guess, Jason Kenney fell out of a plane and Jeff Callaway somehow won the leadership, he would have been willing to take on the leadership. That means that he wasn't completely misleading people as to his goals, I guess. But let's take a look, as the police inspector in that clip said. We decided to take a look at Section 380, and I'm not a lawyer, let's be clear, and we don't have any lawyers on staff here at the Breakdown, so you can talk to an expert who has an opinion, I think is how it was said. But basically what the Criminal Code Section 380 says is everyone who by deceit, falsehood, or other fraudulent means, whether or not it is false pretense within the meaning of this act, defrauds the public or person, whether ascertained or not, of any property, money, or valuable security or any service, is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to a term of imprisonment not exceeding 14 years when the subject matter of the offense is a testamentary instrument if the value of the subject matter of the offense exceeds $5,000 or is guilty. So what Section 380 appears to say, and again, totally not a lawyer here, but what Section 380 appears to say is it's got to have monetary value. The thing that you're saying that you're going to give people has to have a defined monetary value. And if it doesn't, then it's not fraud. And a leadership of a political party doesn't have a defined monetary value for the people that would be voting for that person. Maybe that's what the inspector was going for. It's a very confusing clip. Now, the good news is, to confirm whether or not it really is that confusing, in a couple of days we're going to be presenting a conversation with somebody who maybe can share some light on that. But moving on from there, that was the Callaway piece. What about the UCP leadership race? Were there fraudulent votes cast?
Comprehensive investigation into voter identity fraud, the Alberta RCMP determined that there were suspected instances of potential fraud. However, there was insufficient evidence to charge any suspect. And again, there was no evidence that any leadership candidate orchestrated these relatively rare instances. The decision on whether or not to lay a charge in Alberta rests with the police. However, throughout this investigation, as is normal for a significant investigation, the police did seek advice from the Crown, which began in Alberta, but was later referred to the Ontario Minister of the Attorney General, who assigned Crown prosecutors.
So again, a lot to unpack there. Because on one hand, what it appears to be being presented is you can't say somebody committed fraud unless they've gone to court and they've been found guilty of fraud. But they weren't able to identify the bits that they needed to determine exactly who to charge with the fraud. So they didn't charge anyone with fraud, but also there's a clear delineation that's going on there where he's saying, hey, you know what? Normally, the Alberta police, we would make the decisions about who would get charged. In this case, as with all high-profile cases, they had Crown prosecutors who they were consulting on the charges question. Now, of course, he's not going to say, and of course, we're just reading into it. He's not going to say, hey, you know what? It was the Crown prosecutors who made the decision not to lay the charges. We did our best. What are you going to do? He's not going to say that. And to be clear, he didn't say that. But we're having a press conference when there's no charges, and that's not a thing that happens. And part of the message inside of the press conference is we weren't the only ones who were involved in the decision in regards to whether or not charges should be laid. But they are very clear that they have really good indication that, yeah, in fact, there was some fraudulent votes. Now, this is where it starts to get even more complicated.
Largely many of these the votes that we're talking about, the 200, it's where we had clear evidence from the person whose identity was associated to that vote had no knowledge or did not permit anyone to vote on their behalf. So in those cases, obviously we tried to identify there was multiple different mechanisms. Sometimes it was an email address that the PIN was delivered. Sometimes it was through a phone system, and then also how the vote was cast. It could be cast through a telephone. It could also be cast by logging into a website. We do not have evidence to suggest that there is potential fraud in the case of those votes, but it's important to clarify that those matters have not been tested in court, and there was insufficient evidence to lay a charge. And our biggest obstacle was being able to satisfy ourselves that we would have sufficient evidence around the identity of the persons responsible to prove that. And when you think about how voting works, and you need a witness often to an offense. And if you don't have a witness, you need to tie the device that was connected to the offense, if it's even knowable, because there's ways sometimes it's not knowable, but if it's knowable, to that suspect in a clear manner. And we didn't have that evidence at the end of the day.
So, to recap the story so far, there were fraudulent votes that were cast. It was only about 200, but that's still 200 people who had their identities, in effect, stolen. But because the course of the investigation wasn't able to identify the specific individuals who would have cast the vote using that stolen identity, because the votes were cast through a variety of means and they didn't have a witness to say, yes, that's who did it. It was that guy. They didn't have anyone to do that. Because of that, because they couldn't say specifically which person cast the vote for that individual, they didn't have the ability to lay charges. And that's just where it's going to be left, which is complicated for a lot of different reasons, because there are 200, at least, or roughly, Albertans who had their identities stolen in order for people to cast votes for them in the 2017 UCP leadership race. And this press conference didn't provide any sort of closure or description as to what steps were being taken for those people. They just said, well, we're not going to be able to press charges in those cases. The UCP hasn't issued a statement saying, hey, you know what? We've been working very closely with the RCMP, and at the conclusion of their investigation, we asked for all of the names of all of the folks who had these fraudulent votes cast in their names so that we could purge our databases. And we're sending out apology letters with maybe one of those nice little edible floral arrangements, the fruit baskets, because we're really, really sorry that happened. Sorry, everybody. The UCP hasn't said anything like that. And the other piece that gets to be particularly important in this conversation, and this is something that more than about a couple of people have observed, is this whole situation in many ways provides a roadmap for how it is that if you wanted to subvert an internal party process, there's some ways that maybe you could give it a try. Now, nobody's saying to do that, to be clear. But throughout the press conference, the police officer was very, very clear. You know, this is not, he wanted to be very clear, and it's in the official RCMP statement as well. This is not a publicly administered election. This isn't like the provincial elections or the municipal elections that are overseen and administered by a totally different body. These are internal party matters. And that brings us to the problem of the private clubs. Because what this case, at the very least, illustrates is that there are mechanisms inside of political parties that exist so that nomination races can be attempted to be influenced. Now, whether we're talking about nomination races for constituencies or we're talking about nomination races for leaderships, as long as it's the private club that's administering things in the closed room that is that private club, there's ways that that can be exploited. And we certainly saw that in the last provincial election, in the run-up to the last provincial election, I should say, where there were multiple constituencies where people very much raised concerns about abnormal things that were happening that the party seemed to be allowing because they wanted their preferred candidate, or that constituency association wanted their preferred candidate. Now, all of this is to say the party process can be very flawed. And it forces the question, with all of this going on, with all the drama, with all the intrigue, with all of the ways that it can cause failures, with the people having their identity stolen, with all of this, you got to ask the question, why would we want to do this on the municipal level? Why would people be pushing so hard to do this on the municipal level? We've seen Danielle Smith come out with policies that are very, very clearly advocating for parties at the municipal level, despite the fact people don't want that. Most people don't want that. And we've seen all sorts of special interest groups who have very particular agendas wanting to see the party system come to the municipal level. But until we get these things sorted out, especially when we're talking about nomination races where if you get the endorsement of that party, it's a given that you're going to be an MLA or a premier, or if it rolls out to the municipal levels, potentially a city councillor or a mayor. If we don't get those holes plugged, we're setting ourselves up for a whole lot of trouble. Moving on from there, we got to talk about drugs, is what we got to talk about for a second here. So when I say we got to talk about drugs, the reason why I'm saying this is because, as we touched on last live episode that we did, there's a new Pharmacare deal. It's kind of a big deal. The federal NDP and the federal Liberals got together and they said, hey, there's some things that people shouldn't have to pay for when it comes to accessing drugs, when it comes to accessing medications. And that's a big thing to get started on. A national Pharmacare plan is a big thing. It's a big project. And there's lots of little things that got to be worked out along the way. So they said, you know what, we're going to start with just a couple of broad areas. We're going to start with birth control, and we're going to start with diabetes medications. Sounds like a really good deal. But, as will come as a shock to absolutely no one, Danielle Smith had some thoughts.
Look, I understand that what people think a national Pharmacare program is that it covers 100% of drugs, 100% of the time, 100% of the dollars. That's not the case. And I'll tell you the conversation I'd have to have with my dad, who is on our seniors Pharmacare program. It covers 7 drugs for him. He doesn't have diabetes, so it doesn't cover insulin. So I'd have to say, Dad, would you like me to cancel your coverage and we'll pay 100% of your birth control? Because that's all the federal program covers. It covers diabetes and birth control. 2 types of diseases. Our Pharmacare program covers 5,000 drugs. There is no possible way that I would put people at risk of having their drugs not being covered by opting into such a deficient federal plan. If the feds want to come to us...
It's a case of one or the other. You couldn't have both?
Well, no, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to come in. What we'd have to do, I guess, is create some kind of carve-out where I suppose you'd keep our plan and then there'd be a secondary plan that would only cover those two types of products right from $1. But why would you create a program like that? That's bananas. What you would do is if they wanted to deal with us in good faith, they'd come to us and say, what do you currently cover? And we'd tell them, well, we cover 50 different types of birth control. And we also cover 9 different types of insulin, plus $2,400 worth of insulin products. Would you like to work with us to expand that to cover more people? Would you like to work with us to make sure that our 5,000 drug plan can be applied to people who aren't covered? If that's how they approached us, you bet. That's how I'd want to do it. But that's not what they want to do. They want to create a 2-drug plan, pretend to the public that they're doing something comprehensive, universal, that will cover everything from $1, and it's just not true. And so it's 100% politics, and they're trying to wedge people on what they hope it will be, but that is not what it is. And I'm not going to compromise people's current drug plans, making them believe that the federal drug plan is going to be better. It's 2 types of medications. That's it.
Glad you could clarify that for us, Premier Smith.
You know that scene in one of those Star Wars movies where Luke Skywalker, anybody who grew up in the 80s knows Luke Skywalker is just like awesome. But Luke Skywalker says, it's remarkable everything that you just said was wrong. That definitely applies here. Now, we could start at the highest of levels and we could say, hey, Danny, you said that it only covers 2 types of diseases. Pregnancy's not a disease. It's not a disease, Danny. Pregnancy's not. Diabetes, yes. But pregnancy is not a disease. You can't call it that. We could start with that, but there's some bigger things that we could potentially go on to, because Danny says, hey, you know what? We've got all this amazing provincial coverage. It's so good with the coverage and what we provide, and why would you possibly want anything else? So we thought, hey, you know what? Maybe we'll take a look at what that coverage actually is. So we went to the provincial website to take a look at what the drug coverage is that's covered by the province. There's the Alberta Health Benefit, Alberta Adult Health Benefit. Benefits are available to low-income Albertans through the Adult Health Benefit, the Alberta Child Health Benefit. That's another one where we're taking a look at low-income families can apply to this program to get eyeglasses, prescription drugs, dental care for their kids. There's AISH, which is the Assured Income for the Severely Handicapped, and everybody knows anybody who's had to go through the process to get on AISH. It's not an easy process. There's some biosimilar drugs that are available. You can claim benefits through Alberta Blue Cross. There's the Coverage for Seniors program. There's drug benefit list and drug review process. There's non-group coverage. We're going to talk about non-group coverage in just a sec here. There's the opioid agonist therapy gap coverage program. There's palliative healthcare benefits, and there's specialized drug benefits. So to make a very, very long story short, if you want to get healthcare coverage from the province of Alberta, here's your options. You can be really poor. And we're going to talk about how poor in just a second. You can be really disabled. You can be really old. Or you can go after the non-group coverage. Now, what is the non-group coverage? Well, in effect, it's Blue Cross. So you can sign up for Blue Cross with the province of Alberta. And, oh, wait, it's still not free, though. You're still paying money. So if we're talking about the full premium, what you would pay would be for a single adult to get partial coverage, because this is not 100% coverage for most things. It's partial coverage for a lot of things. The full premium, you can pay $63.50, or for a family, you can pay $118. Now, you can get subsidized premiums, but that's where we have to have a conversation about what's required in order to get the subsidized premiums. So again, if you're enrolled in the non-group coverage, the premium subsidy program may help lower income Albertans reduce their premiums. You can apply for a premium subsidy for the current benefit plus 2 previous benefit years. You will still pay up to $25 per prescription purchased. A couple of other eligibility pieces. All residents of Alberta are eligible to apply unless you are a new or returning resident from outside of Canada, exempt from paying income tax for religious, charitable, or communal reasons, a student from outside of Canada who's temporarily in Canada, or a senior 65 years of older, because seniors are eligible to apply for the premium subsidies based on the old people's subsidy program that we mentioned earlier. But let's take a look at what those actual income thresholds look like. So if you're a single person and you want to apply for the reduced premiums that the province generously offers, how much money? What's the cutoff? Oh, you have to make less than $20,970 a year. If you have a family with no children, you have to make less than $33,240 a year. And if you're a family with children, you have to make less than $39,250 a year. So when we're talking about how low income this actually is, it's really low income in order to access any of these programs. And that's a really important thing to consider because Danny's presenting it in the context of, oh, hey, everybody, but look, we've got all this coverage. Coverage is so much, but you have to make a stunning amount of not money in order to be eligible for any of these programs, or you have to be eligible, you have to be old, or you have to be disabled. For a little bit of context, as of January 24th of this year, the average salary per individual is $50,000, $50,630. So you have to make basically a third of what the average Albertan is making in order to apply for any of these programs. So for Danny to say, hey, we've got this comprehensive, we've got so much coverage. This coverage is just falling out of the trees in Alberta. For Danny to say that is patently false. If you make more than, as a single person, if you make more than $20,000 a year, you're not eligible. As an average Albertan, you're not eligible for any of these coverage options, for any of these reduced premiums. You can pay the monthly premium, the $100 and some odd dollars. You can pay that and get partial health coverage through Alberta Cross, but you can do that with any health insurance organization. So it's not accessible. It's not 100% free coverage for these drugs. That's a gross misrepresentation of what the program is. And it's really important to be really clear about that, because otherwise people could be left with the impression that somebody is trying to, use politics to be divisive, to create something of a wedge issue. But no, I think you could only really make that sort of assertion if there was any sort of evidence that it was being so grossly misrepresented. That somebody was saying, let's imagine a circumstance where somebody was straight up asked, is it an either or situation? If somebody gets coverage for birth control or for diabetes medications, does that mean that they can't have any other coverage? You'd have to have somebody, have a weekly radio program and say, yes, that's absolutely the case. Because it's not. If we take a look at just a little bit of what information is available around the program, the Council of Canadians is very, very clear on the information that's available. Everyone in Canada with a healthcare card will be eligible for coverage under the National Pharmacare plan, not just the uninsured. Unlike the Canadian Dental Care Plan, there will be no income cutoffs or eligibility rules that excluded people covered by existing plans, public or private. This is a significant win considering how strongly the insurance industry lobbied for a Pharmacare plan that only covered the uninsured. Such a program would have done nothing for the nearly 60% of Canadians with private insurance plans who nevertheless can't afford their prescription drugs due to high copayments or deductibles. So, to correct again the premier of the province in regards to what's actually happening with this program, no, it's not an either or. This is an and. That's it. The federal Pharmacare program, as it's been announced, as it's been released, would provide coverage for every single Canadian with a healthcare card for any of the listed diabetes medications 100% of the time. And it would also cover all of the birth control products that are included in this first rollout 100% of the time for 100% of all Canadians. But that doesn't mean that the province would then have to stop providing Pharmacare for people on age or for people who are making precious little in order to try to make ends meet in this very expensive province to live in. There's nowhere that says in order for people to have those things, to have access to the birth control and the diabetes meds, that the province would have to shut down all of the existing Pharmacare programs. It's just not true. And of course, this program that would provide diabetes medications coverage for all Albertans 100% of the time with 100% of the cost covered. This program that would provide birth control for 100% of Albertans 100% of the time for 100% of the cost covered. That's the program that Danielle Smith and the UCP have apparently decided to opt out of. The premier, who doesn't even understand what the program is, just wants the money to roll it into the existing programs. It's no wonder the Turkish Tylenol worked out the way that it did. If this is the grasp of these relatively simple issues that the Premier of Alberta currently has. And it's going to hurt people. That's the really unfortunate part. There are people who could absolutely do very, very well. You want to talk about addressing cost of living? A fantastic way to address cost of living for people who are having to navigate diabetes would be to eliminate a lot of the expensive costs that they face day to day. There's no shortage of anecdotal stories of people talking about, I have to limit my testing because I got to make sure that I have enough strips or lancets to get me through the month because there's only so much that I can afford. This would eliminate that. But Danny's got to own the feds. Moving on from there, we get into our main event. We're talking about the coal mining. And this is a bit of a deep dive, so strap in, because it's going to take a little while to get to the places that we need to go. But let's start with, I just got to say, going through your province, your premier yesterday, the first half hour, Danny managed to make it a good 33 minutes without saying anything unremarkable. And here at the breakdown, we were kind of oh, wow, we're not going to have any material to work with here? This is delightful. But as you saw, she had her thoughts on Pharmacare. She also had her thoughts on coal mining.
Energy Minister, I believe, wrote a letter to the CEO of the Alberta Energy Regulator, including a clarification that those 4 projects could still be pursued. So what's going on? Why is this thing just keep coming back? Are we going to have a hard black and white decision, yes or no, on development?
Well, there were 4 advanced projects that had been under consideration, and then the change was made to the coal policy, which I think caused a lot of backlash and anger, because the 1976 coal policy had a whole vast areas that were off limits for development. When it got rescinded, then there were a number of different companies that were going onto pristine land and starting to do some of the initial work to determine whether they could develop. So we reinstituted the coal policy, but there were still those 4 advanced projects that were excluded from that policy because they'd already been disturbed. I think there's a couple up in the Hinton Grand Cache area. There's Tent Mountain and there's Grassy Mountain. And
so hesitant to use the word, but grandfathered would be sort of an application here.
it would, because if you go down and look at those sites, they'd already been disturbed, they'd already been developed, there's already existing infrastructure there, and quite frankly, when they were decommissioned, they were not reclaimed particularly well. And so I think there's been some appetite in the community to get them reclaimed properly and to reconsider whether or not they should also be mined at the same time. So that's why those 4 projects had been given a carve-out when the new coal policy came back in, to see whether there was some local support to be able to reopen them, finish the mining, and then reclaim them properly. So we're just letting the process proceed, and wanted to make sure that the AER knew that they could continue looking at those as 4 advanced projects, that there wasn't an intention for that to be part of the reinstatement of the 1976 coal policy. So I'll just let that play out, and they'll have to see if they can get public support, if they can address the environmental issues. Anytime we have a major project, they have to have all of those considerations.
Okay, so that's Danny's thoughts on the coal mining situation, and in particular in regards to Grassy Mountain. Now, if we're talking about Grassy Mountain, we've got to talk about Northback, which is a subsidiary of Hancock Prospecting. And this is where things get kind of silly really quickly. So Hancock is actually an Australian company. It's owned by one of I believe she's the wealthiest woman in Australia. She's worth like billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. Made tons of money in Australia with mining. But Northback is kind of version 2.0 of Hancock Prospecting's work at Grassy Mountain. Now, in 2014, Benga Mining Limited, which is the predecessor company of Northback, started a proposal for the Grassy Mountain coal mine, mining a metallurgical coal mine with a production capacity of a maximum of 4 million tons of coal per year over a mine life of about 25 years. Now, the site that they looked at on Grassy Mountain had previously been a coal mine, but it had been shut down. So this was a new application to go into that space to get the metallurgical coal. That's what that was. Now, in 2020, the UCP rescinded the 1976 coal policy, and they did so without any consultation. And this caused a lot of concern for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, the no consultation part was a pretty big one. But when we're talking about the areas that we're talking about, that's where a lot of water for southern Alberta comes from. And at the same time as this was going on, there were very real concerns about the amount of selenium, which is a byproduct of these mining operations, that was already high in some Alberta rivers because of previous coal mining operations. So selenium, we've heard from a couple folks on who've offered some insight on the show before. It's actually in small doses a good thing, kind of like water. You want the right amount of water. You want to be able to drink some water. But if it's over your head, it's a bad thing. So the poison is in the dose, is a good way to say it. And if there's too much selenium, not only does that go into the water supply, but it also goes into the food supply. It starts to affect agriculture. It starts to affect ranching. All of these things turns into a really big problem really, really quickly. And starting up another coal mine at that site, odds are good, especially when you take a look at the environmental record that this province has, odds are good that there is a very high risk of more selenium leaching into the water supply. As we're heading into a drought in the province of Alberta, that's not great, I think most people would probably say. But because of the public outcry, because of the public campaigns that were put into place immediately after this policy was done, Alberta reverses direction on coal development and reinstated the 1976 policy. Now, with that, they also put in a ministerial order saying, yeah, there's not to be any coal mining in any of these areas. So that's sort of the story so far in regards to how coal mining in Alberta kind of flowed through for a while there. But there were some changes that happened. One of the big things that is relevant to this particular conversation is that in June of 2021, a joint federal provincial review panel denied Benga's permits needed to resume mining for steelmaking coal at Grassy Mountain. So both the province and the federal government said, "Nuh-uh, you don't get to do the coal mining. Sorry." And by most interpretations, that was the end of that project. And the panel, this is the joint provincial federal panel, said that the environmental effects on fish and water quality would outweigh the project's economic impacts. So that was that. But then Northback came to be because the Benga mine thing, the Benga name, that's no good anymore. What if we rebranded and we called ourselves Northback? And then what if we applied for exploration drilling? So they're not actually doing the coal mining yet. What they're wanting to do is drill a bunch of very deep holes in the ground to determine the size of the coal deposit. Now, it's a pretty safe bet to say that if you're going to spend a boatload of money drilling very deep holes in the ground to measure a coal deposit, you're doing that not just for academic reasons. You're doing that because at some point in time, you want to be able to get that coal out of the ground and make a boatload of money. Consequences be damned. There's another piece that's happening concurrently with all of this. Benga and Northback did a very, very good job, and we're going to talk about how in just a sec, of talking about how wonderful this coal mine could be for some people, not lots of people, but some people. And one of the things that happened is in the course of the decision where the federal government said, no, we're not going to give you a permit for this coal mine, two First Nations said, hey, we don't think that necessarily we got the consultation process that we should. The Piikani and Stoney Nations didn't get the opportunity to speak to the federal government about why they believe that the mine could be a good thing. So there's been a whole process that has taken place, and now the status of that is the federal government has to do the consultation part with the Piikani and the Stoney in order to say, yeah, we're still not going to do the permit, but we did the consultation because that's how consultation works in Canada. But it's fascinating that it's the Stoney and the Piikani that have said, hey, we'd actually like to have a conversation about how this mine could potentially be a good thing. Now, we get back to the rebranding of the Benga to Northback, because some other things happened in here that are really, really important to understand. The 2002 ministerial order that I referenced earlier restricted coal projects but allowed for exceptions for active coal mines, for advanced projects, and for safety and security activities. The definition of advanced means a project that's already moving through a regulatory process. While Benga did submit documents and go through the regulatory process, that process was rejected in 2021 as not being in the public interest by both the feds and, again, the province. And this was a UCP government at the time. Really important to keep that in mind for context. Unless, of course, you have a minister of energy that decides to write a letter saying, no, I've taken a look at this, and I believe that this is an advanced project. because Brian Jean decided to write a letter to the Alberta Energy Regulator saying that the project should be considered an advanced project. While all of this has been going on, Northback has still been really quite busy. They have launched an impressive PR campaign that's been going on this whole time. And we want to talk about a couple of the things that they've done. One of the things that most recently caught a lot of people's eye was they made a huge donation, $75,000 donation to a school district, which is kind of sort of a private school district, where they talked about, so it's the Livingston School. No, I'm going to get the name wrong. I'm just going to skip right past it. They donated $75,000 to a lunch program. Now, hopefully, that lunch program comes with a whole lot of bottles of water, because that $75,000 is not going to cover the potential damage to the water situation that's going on with the selenium and everything else that could potentially be leaching out. Again, want to highlight both the province and the federal government said the environmental impact is not worth the benefit that would come to the province. So Northback has been going out of their way to convince people, nah, this is actually a really, really good thing. But it's not just the lunch program. And it's kind of fun because they spent $75,000 on this lunch program, and with the press release got their name wrong. They said Northback. Now, it's kind of wild that a school district that's in charge of educating kids would get the spelling wrong in their press release for the company that gave them $75,000, but do what you will. This announcement also came with a social media tweet. Today, Northback presented a $75,000 check to LRSD for our nutrition program and treated students at the school to breakfast. This general donation will help an additional 1,000 students in our division, and every student every day, some hashtags, a link, and some pictures. But here's the thing. When you take a close look at those pictures, there's a familiar face in there. Why, that's Chelsea Petrovich, who is the MLA for Livingston-McLeod. Hey, did Chelsea happen to have any thoughts about whether or not there were any active projects going on in the UCP, in the provincial election?
New coal mining in the eastern slopes, let's say anywhere between the Crow's Nest Pass and Rocky Mountain House, should be a yes or no, I think. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So as it currently stands, there are no active requests in Alberta for coal mines within our eastern slopes.
So in 2023, Chelsea Petrovich, who was running for the UCP, who was hanging around with all the UCP powers that be, was very, very clear. There's no active projects. There's no advanced projects. There's nothing going on. And yet Brian Jean has said, oh, yeah, no, it's a work in progress. But it's not just lunch programs that Northback is doing, They're doing a whole lot more. They're donating to all kinds of different local initiatives. What we have here is a donation of $39,404 under Australia Days. We're celebrating Australia Days in the Crow's Nest Pass, but there's no corporate influence. It's cool, y'all. Northback Australia Day donated $39,404 to the outdoor skate park, but that's not all. They also donated $39,404 to the Crow's Nest Pass Quad Squad. But wait, there's more, because of course there is. Northback also hosts events regularly and has since they became Northback in the Crow's Nest Pass area in Blairmore. So they have a ladies' night at the golf course. You can go and you can play 5 holes. They got prizes. It's cheap. You get a good dinner. They got Easter egg hunts, March 31st. You can get a brunch at the Crow's Nest Pass golf course. They have a Christmas festival brunch, sponsored by Northback. It's almost as if, I don't know, Northback, what's the turn of phrase that I'm looking for here? It's almost as if Northback was part of building that golf course, they were. The golf course was recently upgraded in a major way. I think it was 5 holes that were upgraded and moved, and that was done with funding by Northback. So Northback is pouring gobs of money into the Crow's Nest Pass area. And we're talking about a population, when you talk about Crow's Nest Pass, you're talking about a population of about 6,000 people. They're pouring tons of money into this area to try to convince people that they're just the bestest darn company and that everybody should be super comfortable with them ripping apart a mountain and maybe causing toxic amounts of chemicals to go into the water supply that would infect the entire southern half of the province and have massive impacts on agriculture. That's cool though, because they're just so gosh darn nice. And they've been doing a tour as well, because Northback recently appeared to tell a heartwarming story about their lunch program at Fort Macleod.
The piece on the drilling application, and then I'm going to pass it over to Dana, our community relations advisor, and she's going to provide a brief update on a really wonderful piece of work that she's done recently. The vast majority of people opposed to us conducting exploratory drilling program are in Lethbridge, Calgary, or Edmonton. And so, I guess the key message of this slide is that, yes, there's people opposed to us doing this drilling. The vast majority of them wouldn't, directly be impacted by that drilling, whereas the people that would be directly impacted by this project are generally, not entirely, but generally supportive of the project. So I'm just going to pause there before we move on to the next piece of the presentation for Dana to talk to you about the Northback Breakfast Program.
So in the spring of 2023, my then 11-year-old daughter came to me in tears saying, "Mom, there are kids at my school that are hungry." And so she started taking extra snacks with her to school. She was doing everything she could. And in the summer, she said, "Mom, is there something we can do?" And luckily for us, there was. Can you just click the next? So I took the idea to our CEO, and we were able to announce that Northback would partner with Livingston Range School Division by providing $75,000 per year for the Northback Breakfast Program, which will support the Livingston Range School Division Nutrition Program. So this sponsorship will provide crucial resources to ensure the continuity and growth of the nutrition program, which serves healthy food to all the students within Livingston Range School Division. This contribution aligns with our vision of creating a better future and supporting communities and families. So we're really excited for this initiative, and we'll be rolling it out at Livingston School in Lumbrick on March 4th. So very, very proud to be part of this program.
Now, again, that is a corporate initiative that's being designed to create goodwill within the communities that are going to be directly impacted if the drilling goes ahead. That then turns into a coal mine. But inexplicably, that was where Chelsea Petrovich decided to spend her lunch day posing beside the Northback banners. Now, there's some additional context that we got to put in order to make sense of this whole, try to make a little bit of sense of this whole situation. And we're going to go to one of the slides that was actually used in that presentation in Fort Macleod. Because when we're talking about when they want to start drilling, which is as soon as possible, and when we're talking about what they need to do that drilling, we're talking about a lot of water. How much water? Well, according to Northback themselves, they are requesting 1,500 cubic meters at a pumping rate of 0.5 meters per second, which when you say it like that, boy, it doesn't sound 1,500 cubic meters. That doesn't sound like that much unless you actually break it down into real context. 1,500 cubic meters is 1.5 million liters of water that they want to use for drilling as the province heads into what many are anticipating, particularly in southern Alberta, to be a catastrophic drought period. But let's take 1.5 million liters of water so that Northback, who's done all of this amazing PR work and who apparently has the full-throated support of Brian Jean and Danielle Smith, let's make that happen. And to really put as fine of a point as possible on how messed up this situation is, if we were to take a look at the recent renewables moratorium, let's say that Northback, instead of wanting to mine coal that could leach all sorts of crap into the water supply, instead of that, Northback wanted to put up some wind turbines, or Northback wanted to put up solar. Under provincial regulations, they would not be allowed to. Let me just say that again. If Northback or any other organization wanted to go to one of these mine sites, even if they said, hey, you know what? We get that there's some remediation to be done. Tell you what, we're going to do the remediation. But what we'd like to do is set up some wind turbines and some solar in that whole area when we're done. That's cool, right? They wouldn't be allowed to do that on this site. But a coal mine that's going to have all kinds of negative environmental effects, including leaching selenium. And to be clear, that 1.5 million liters of water that I just talked about, that's not 1.5 million liters of water for the project. That's 1.5 million liters of water just to drill a few holes. If they get to the point where they're actually going to pursue the coal mine, if Danielle Smith and the UCP greenlight this because there is insufficient public outcry, if that's what happens, the volume of water is going to make 1.5 million liters of water look like a literal drop in a bucket. That's what's going on with Grassy Mountain. And it's worth highlighting, that's only one of the 4 projects that Danielle Smith and Brian Jean have said, nah, they're advanced projects. It's cool. We're going to exempt them from the ministerial order. We've seen in this province that when people get motivated, when people get loud, they can make the government blink. And if we start to see enough outcry against this irresponsible move, this project that the province of Alberta, let me just say this again to be super clear, Kenney and Trudeau governments both agreed that the damage that this project would cause to the environment wasn't worth it. I just want to say that one more time. The governments led by Jason Kenney and Justin Trudeau agreed on a thing, and it was that this mine is a bad idea. It's not worth it. It's not worth the environmental damage. It's not worth the impact on wildlife. It's just not worth it. To say nothing of the fact that most of the money made from this mine wouldn't be staying in Alberta. I mean, sure, they'd probably pay for the occasional Easter egg hunt and ladies' night at the golf course that they bought. But most of the money is going to go back to the billionaire in Australia. We got one more little piece that we got to throw in for the evening. And then we're going to open it up to the open mic if there's anybody who wants to weigh in. And if there's not, that's okay too. But there was one more clip from your province, your premier, that really just kind of highlighted so many problems with the style of leadership that Danielle Smith brings to the table.
There's over 400,000 people with diabetes in the province of Alberta. I don't know if it's type 1, type 2, where the ratio is, but if you go on a proper diet and you take some supplements, you can get off the insulin. You don't have to keep taking the insulin. The other thing is like take a product like just anybody that's listening, Cheerios and pesticides. I can't remember the name of the chemical. It's chlorquat or whatever, but they're spraying it all over. But the question is, if it's in Quaker Oats and Cheerios, what's the long-term effects on the environment? Like these chemicals, if they don't break down and they go into the water table, which everything ends up back in the environment, is there any way that we could get a training program for people that are like diet, nutrition, that are in the hospital system, or maybe start it earlier in the education system in the school, and teach people what to look for in foods, and maybe kick some of this stuff out that has all the chemicals in it, and stop companies from spraying all these chemicals all over in the environment.
Don, thank you. Don, thanks for that. I recently had a really good conversation with Darren Entwistle at TELUS Health, and they're putting together an app very much along the lines that you're describing.
I just can't even hear that without bursting out into laughter. So Danielle Smith gets confronted with a conspiracy theorist on her radio show who is saying things that are demonstrably false about diabetes. Let's be clear, because apparently Danielle Smith couldn't be bothered to set the record straight around diabetes. There's two types of diabetes. There's type 1 and type 2, or often are referred to as insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus and non-insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus. Insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus is somebody who's, I always say this wrong, I want to say islet. I think it's islet. I don't know. Medical terminology. It's so hard. But their cells that create the insulin in the pancreas don't do that. And so there's no amount of diet or herbal supplements or exercise that's going to turn on a part of your body that has just stopped. It doesn't work. It's been destroyed. It's just not going to happen. Now, there are some people who have type 2 or non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. There are some cases where some people with diet and exercise can get off of not the insulin because they're non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, but they can get off the other diabetes medications potentially, but it's not a guarantee and it's not for everybody. So for Danielle Smith to let this person just go uncorrected in the same episode of Your Province, Your Premier, where she's talking about the Pharmacare program that the feds are rolling out and the diseases that are diabetes and pregnancy. You can go back and listen to it. She says it's a disease. To not offer any sort of correction for no, what you're saying is patently false and it's not true, is bad enough. But instead of saying that to that person, hey, what you're saying is simply not true, or better, because maybe she doesn't know that there's two different types of diabetes. Maybe she doesn't know about the medications. One would hope that she'd been briefed on it, given her hard stance on the federal Pharmacare program. But let's give Danny the most benefit of the doubt possible here, and she just doesn't know. The correct answer would be to say, "Wow, those are some pretty bold statements you're making there, Dawn. You know what? I'm gonna have to do some looking into that, because I need to talk to some experts or healthcare professionals about how that actually works." But to pivot to the TELUS Health app, let's all fondly pour one out for Babylon, shall we? That is, it's always a spin to the corporate sponsors. It's always a spin to well, let's talk about the people that we're contracting with. Let's talk about the people who are gonna make money. Let's talk about the people who have the owner boxes at the Flames games and the Oilers games that I can now go to because I changed the rules about what kind of gifts I can accept. Let me talk about that app for a second. It's a great little app. And then to just go into another infomercial that is so her style is really quite on brand. That's a double entendre because it's on brand about the branding stuff. So that ends the program proper of what we have lined up for tonight. Once again, I'm just going to throw it out there. We already got somebody in the queue, and I have a feeling we're going to talk about selenium. But once again, if you're listening to the show live, or if you're watching the show live, you can hop on the X Spaces or the Twitter Spaces, and you can join in. As long as you're joining in from a phone, doesn't work from computers and tablets yet. It's got to be like a phone device, and then you can just request to be speaker. And with all of that being said, I'm going to bring in our first speaker, who is in fact this is one of the people that I was alluding to when I was saying, earlier somebody had said sometimes selenium has an important role in agriculture, but it very much depends on the dose. Tammy, how are you doing tonight?
Oh, not too bad. You hit actually 3 things that I hate about the UCP, so buckle up.
All right, it's all yours.
Okay, so yes, we'll start with selenium since you've already introed that. I'm a farmer. My mom and dad were farmers. We used to have a selenium depleted part of land. However, to make you understand how little selenium an animal needs that is being raised on a selenium depleted piece of land, we literally at the birth of a calf would go in, put the calf in the squeeze. I'd hold it for my mom, and the shot was smaller than most of my doses of insulin. And that was as much selenium as that calf needed to grow up into a nice, strong heifer or bull for its entire life.
So not a lot.
That's it. It's tiny, especially when you're not talking about a human being-sized animal. Calves are generally 120, 100, it's little. So the amount of selenium, and here's the bigger issue that I don't think enough people understand. So in BC, where they've already had this happen, okay, the water in the places where they've allowed the coal mining to be done is now so poisoned that the federal government is forcing the coal mining companies that have done this to haul water in for people to use. Because the water is too poisoned for human use. Because to say that it's only affecting animals is wrong. It will affect us as well. It affects fish, it affects animals, it affects everything.
Yep. 100%.
So just the fact that they only look at it in animals at first is because basically they drink more of water that might be contaminated.
Yeah.
So here's the other problem with selenium. Selenium, there are plants that are called selenium multipliers. One of them happens to be one of our favorite feedstock animals in Alberta. It's called alfalfa. So when alfalfa pulls selenium out of the water or ground in order to build, the alfalfa itself becomes poisonous. You cannot use it as feedstock. You cannot use it for people like alfalfa sprouts.
I still don't understand people who like alfalfa sprouts.
I don't really either, but it's a thing. The selenium and alfalfa does not mix. And then we're not even looking with this discussion, the fish.
Yeah.
That water with the selenium in it, guess what? You get deformed fish as they're being grown. Elk, deer, moose, all drinking that selenium poisoned water. Guess what? You know what happens when they get selenium poisoning? So you get what in cattle we call sleepy calves. They're born So number one, the first thing is the males or the females, sorry, will abort a lot of the times their offspring. The ones that are born, they're born on too small of a birth weight, and they have sleepy baby syndrome. Basically, their bodies just don't work right, and they die. So this is way, like, it just, I hate the Alberta government.
I hear you, and this is one of the reasons why we wanted to get into it tonight, because the reality is that the PR campaign that Northback is doing down there is they're throwing money at everybody, and when you're dealing with the population that they're dealing with in that town, we're talking like 6,000 people. It's really easy to throw $10,000 at 6,000 people each and not make a dent in your bottom line.
And I put in some of the paperwork to the Alberta government about all of this, to the AER. And you know what? Excuse my language, you probably almost heard the word come out, but I stopped myself. They said, well, why should these people that don't even live in the area have, a say? Well, I came back at them with, because the area you want to pull water out and you want to contaminate, that's the water basin for southern Alberta. That is where the majority of the water, and it doesn't just stay up there. Oh, no. That water basin fills out to the North Saskatchewan. So it's going to hit us. It's going to hit Saskatchewan. It's going to hit everywhere.
Yep.
And they've already gotten in trouble on the other side of the border, on the BC side, because that bullshit over there, that same bullshit, they're in trouble with the United States. Because the states on the other side that have been affected by that water system on that side of the border, they're pissed. Because they've tracked it back to that bullshit. Excuse my language.
Well, no, this is one of the rare situations where I find myself hoping that, it baffles me that two of the First Nations that are down there are the ones that are saying, actually, we'd like the mine. I cannot wrap my head around that.
I hate to say it. Some of it is... I know from being right by the First Nation by our farm. The money is really, 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 and understandably, the money is really attractive. The one that's the area that where our farm is in, they were always getting money from and help from TransAlta because of the power plants.
Mm-hmm.
So for them, for their people, and it's understandable, like I get it. For them, it's a way to make money in areas that are oftentimes very depressed financially. And it's sad, and it's going to affect us all really badly. But that's oftentimes why. And then you have the further thing, and I can only speak from my experience with the band near where our farm is. They are elected officials, and you'll get some elected officials in the band that are really good and really care about their people. And there are others that are more like the UCP and are more worried about how much money they can get out of this deal. And
it's a sad byproduct of democracy pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, very true.
Anything else? You said you had three things, so I want to ask you what the other two are.
I've got three things. So, the diabetes thing. I'm diabetic. I have type 2 diabetes, and I will firmly, accept, yeah, my type 2 was caused by my bad health choices when I was younger. But once the damage is done, it is very unlikely that you can reverse it.
Yep.
You can make it better.
Yep.
Definitely. But once you've damaged the systems that provide your insulin, as much as the insulin resistance that I'm suffering from now, and this kind of ties into the other things about the Pharmacare. I'm on Ozempic, and I'm one of the people who take Ozempic because of my diabetes. I'm not one of the people who take Ozempic because they want to lose weight. For me, the losing weight is a happy circumstance. Like, it's just, that's an added bonus. For me, Ozempic has basically revolutionized my diabetes. But her saying that they already have a great coverage for diabetic everything. Now, I've my health issues.
Yep.
I've got diabetes. I've had 2 strokes, and I've had cancer. And right now I'm being tested for a colonoscopy because they're worried that I might have colon cancer.
Oh, geez.
Hey, they're catching it early.
I mean, there's that, yeah.
That's the way I always look at it. They found it because they found the possibility because I was having problems with a possible other issue, and that issue turned out to be a negative. But when they were doing the PET scan, they looked and they went, "Oh, look, there's this little spot in your colon that's kind of glowing," because they give you the radioactive dye stuff. And they're like, "You should probably see someone about that." And so I flipped because I'm paranoid now about cancer, having had it once already. And, they sent me off. And so tomorrow I get to have my tomorrow I take all the junk that I have to have. And then the next day I have the colonoscopy. But to get all the medical coverage that I need to ensure that I don't have to pay for things that I need, I carry personally one insurance that is a Blue Cross plan. I also have insurance from the company that I work for. And I carry that non-group coverage. That non-group coverage, so in the case of the Blue Cross, if you have pre-existing conditions that require drugs for it, a regular Blue Cross plan will not cover it because it is then a pre-existing condition.
Yep.
So the only way you can get coverage for those drugs that you need, which I do, you have to have the Alberta non-group. And then I was carrying that when I was working as a contractor. And then when I got my other job, they have decent coverage, but they don't, because of all of the health issues that I have. And because, eventually there's a limit to how much they cover. I opted to maintain those other 2 insurances so that I was certain that I was never going to hit a point where, I can't afford my insulin.
Yeah, a lot of people do that.
So the thing is that the Pharmacare would revolutionized for me, because then all of a sudden I wouldn't have to carry, it comes to about $2,500 a year for all the insurance that I carry.
That's a
Mm-hmm.
hell of an angle you've got there. That's a really good. I haven't heard anyone raise that yet. That's a really good point.
And my daughters, both of whom have their ADHD and autistic, they're on several different meds. And because they're young and can't afford insurance for themselves, guess who ends up helping pay for their meds?
Yeah.
Because I can't leave my kids, even though mine's covered, I can't leave my kids trying to get by. And, you know, they're lucky, at least they're not diabetic, but one has ADHD and one has ADHD and is autistic. So her, you know, she says it's like your brain is at war with yourself when you're like that. Because those of us who are autistic are like, we like things in neat little boxes to box people. And ADHD just can't. So her brain is constantly at war with itself, right? She wants things in perfect little boxes, but her ADHD says no.
Yeah.
So, you know, so I hate Danielle Smith. I've started calling her Death Eater Smith because I'm a Harry Potter fan. So she's definitely Death Eater Smith. And so is Adriana LaGrange. They're both Death Eaters, let's face it. So, you know, the bad guys from Harry Potter. But yeah, so now you know why I hate the UCP a lot.
I really like the point that you raise. I really like the point that you raise about how much people could save on extra insurance to cover their diabetes medications, and how quickly that could impact. Like, that's another argument for why are we speaking against, why not we, but why is the province saying no, we want to opt out?
Because all she cares about are her rich friends that this money goes into, right? Tell us. This place, that place. She's not about us. She's about her rich friends that can kick money back to her and her government. That's all she cares about. I get really, really angry with the rural folk that basically they lied. They straight out lied. And the rural Albertans just kind of let it go, and they were okay with that.
I think that there's a lot of like, I struggle with this. You and I have talked about this before, how, you know, my roots are rural Alberta as well. And I think that there is a part of rural Alberta that is, you know, like, I'll put it this way. I think that there's a lot of rural Alberta, because they've not had access to things like high-speed internet. I may get roasted for this, but that's okay. I think that there's a lot of rural Alberta that, because they have not had access to high-speed internet, and they didn't go through that, you know, gradual process of information dissemination that a lot of people went through, they just got the fire hose turned on. And because there are people in positions who are in positions of leadership who are willing to not correct the falsehoods because it's politically expedient for them, I think that we've got this perfect little ratio of fuel and oxygen to burn stuff. And I think that that's a big part of what's going on. And I think it's really, really unfortunate.
I think that's part of it, but I think there's also, and this is going to sound really horrible, but I picked up the bad habit from my mom. I watch American news about.
Oh, don't do that.
Yeah, I know. but the thing is that they have the same problem with their rural people that we do here. And a lot of it is to do with, everyone says it's education, but it's not entirely education.
No.
There's almost an attitude of, we don't care if it hurts us. We want to screw you too, about the people that live in the cities.
Well, I mean, we saw that with the clip that I played from the Fort McLeod City Council thing, where they were like, it's just them city folk in Lethbridge and Calgary and Edmonton that are against these projects.
Yep.
And it's like, but it's not, man. It's just you're buying everybody.
But they some of them, they actually really don't care. They just like, well, we just want to screw you guys too. But some of it, and Chrissy, that's my eldest, keeps saying, I need to sit down and talk to Janice Irwin, because she actually went. Janice was one of her teachers at one point in time. She goes, because she's been living amongst those rural folk, she says she thinks she understands a lot of what their thoughts and their attitudes are. And she's like, I'm like, well, I don't know. I would think that they would know this stuff by now. She goes, well, I don't know, but I need to talk to someone about it, because she's lived amongst them, because her dad and I split, and because I was really young when she was born, she went out to live with them, and now she's like, I wish I'd gone to live with you. So it's kind of interesting, but yeah, she says there are some really weird, strange attitudes. Like my ex, who's her dad, he's literally, there are things that he could so be helped by some of the things that the NDP have been putting forward, because he has now issues. But yet it's almost like the idea that they should vote against the NDP to help themselves, or vote for the NDP to help themselves, rather than the UCP who hurt everyone. It's like that's just not part of the equation for them.
Yeah.
They'll take the pain.
I gotta ask. I'm starting to get a bit of a queue building up here, Tammy. So, what was your third thing, real quick?
Well, no, we actually covered it.
Oh, okay.
Three things was the diabetes meds, the type 1 and type 2, and then the third, and that just naturally bled into talking about the drugs.
Oh, okay. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for I really love, like, I'm going to be ruminating on that for a while, but I really love the argument that you've made about the, if people had their diabetes meds covered, people who carry expensive health insurance, and especially layers of health insurance to cover the cost of expensive diabetes meds, wouldn't have to do that. And that would be a great way to address cost of living for a good number of people. So thank you for that.
No problem.
All right.
Anyway, have fun talking to everybody else.
All right. I'm going to bring in Cassandra, and then Lynn, and then we got Sunshiny in as well. So, Cassandra, what's going on tonight?
Well, Tammy actually touched on part of what I was going to say, and I have to thank her, because that means it'll take me a little bit less time to cover. But the part she touched on was, why people in other parts of the province should care about coal mining and water and stuff. And I think she said it really well, and she said everything I was going to say, so I don't have to cover that now. But I just wanted to say, yeah, I agree. But I do want to talk about the Pharmacare thing, because I've kind of followed this along as it was going, and even when they did the press release, they actually said straight up in the press release that it was going to cover everybody with a healthcare card in Canada, and that, you know, all the stuff that you covered. And it's also on the Canada.ca website. And if you look into it, the other thing they say even if you're on a provincial, they say right in there, even if you're on a provincial program, it will be coordinated, much like I had coverage through my work and my partner had coverage, and they would coordinate the coverage so that we didn't have to pay anything.
Yeah.
So it kind of would work like that. And but the other thing, you know, back to Danielle Smith, that really, you know, Lynn and I were talking in the chat about how we're trying really hard not to be angry. And I have devolved at times with my anger on Twitter and said things I wouldn't normally say because I'm just so frustrated. And I'm saying frustrated because I'm really trying. I am like Lynn. I agree with Lynn. I'm trying not to be angry, but it's really hard. But the thing is, so I'm on AISH, and I get coverage through the AISH program. And what's happened since it wasn't as bad. It wasn't actually quite as bad under Kenny. There was some things, but we would raise a stink and then it would get reversed. Under Danielle Smith, it's just gotten worse. They say that we've got coverage, but there are drugs that I get prescribed by my doctor for my health conditions that they were covered. And normally if something was covered, I'd go into the pharmacy, and if it was covered, it was just covered. But now all of a sudden I will go in, and all of a sudden, you know, it'll get covered. And then all of a sudden when I go to refill it, oh, you got to pay money out of pocket. And sometimes it's beyond my means to cover that cost, because they've decided, instead of just, my doctor says I need this many of this, you know, this many tablets over this much time. And they've decided that, oh no, you only need 10 tablets a year. And this is the kind of thing that they've done, and they've cut things like that. And one of the things is like something that's a really inexpensive medication that I use to manage my colitis, which is Buscopan. And it's actually something I don't even have to go see my doctor. I can actually get the pharmacist to prescribe it for me. And I used to, but the prescription would mean it was covered. And now my doctor prescribed me for a certain amount, because he went over a certain amount. I have to pay like $15 out of pocket. And which means that I have to basically ration it when I need it to manage my condition. And that's just one example. And that's not a life-threatening one. That's a quality of life one, because you cannot function when you're in a flare-up. Like there's no functioning.
Yeah.
Like it's just, you know, and so, but I know people that are diabetic that have had, and people with epilepsy that have gone through, you know, different varieties of drugs to manage their conditions. And in some cases, they found a very specific drug that will manage it where nothing else would. And now all of a sudden it's not covered, and they have to fight to get coverage, and it may or may not get the special approval. And there's that. They've also restricted the amount of Lancets people are allowed to have for diabetes to test themselves, which it does not work, because now anyway. So there's all kinds of things. So these are the kinds of cuts that they've made to the drug coverage that they do supply. So it never covered everything. There was always things that needed to be out of pocket, but now it's even now I'm paying for things out of pocket I never had to pay for before, and that I can't afford, and I'm having to, you know, and I want to say like when we get back to this Pharmacare program, the NDP was working with the Liberals, and they were like, the Liberals wanted to just, let's do a framework. And that was the agreement, was that they would get the framework done. And then they pushed, and they managed to, and then they would slowly, you know, add coverage. They pushed and got right out of the gate them to cover all diabetic diabetes medication and supplies, as well as contraceptives. And the thing about the contraceptives is when we're talking about contraceptives, a lot of times contraceptives aren't just about not getting pregnant.
No.
I've had health conditions throughout my years where I've had to take progesterone only things to manage those conditions. I've had to like my HRT for my menopause, things like that. These fall under contraceptives. So it's not just about it's not just about like stopping people from getting pregnant. And the other thing is these are just the beginning, and they already have plans to roll more coverage out. So this is just the starting point, and eventually it's going to be a full. And this is kind of the way our universal healthcare coverage started. It started incrementally until we had a spectrum of things. They didn't just roll it all out all at once. So I wanted to just kind of cover those facts in there and just say like that, like it's more than just about, like there's all kinds of drugs that will eventually be covered. They don't cover a lot of things that they used to, and they keep whittling away at it. Like I feel like every time I get, I have to redo a certain medication, I get a new little, I never know which one. It's going to be a new surprise that I got to try to afford, because I just don't know what they're going to do next. And it's not, and it's worse for other people with more serious conditions.
Yep.
The other thing, I just wanted to get that out there because it just drives me nuts. I like the amount of misinformation, and I also wanted to point out, if anybody wants to know what exactly this entails, it's right on the Canada.ca website. You can look it up and you can read about it, and it will tell you, and you will see how much of a liar Danielle Smith is. And I really hope she hears me saying this, because it's right there in black and white on the website, and it completely disputes everything she said. And this just drives me nuts that somebody can so blatantly lie. And the other thing I want to say, because I got to say it before I go and let the next person go, is we still have a housing emergency, and there's been so much going on. It's like I get distracted from it because they're just hitting us left and right. But there's still a frickin' housing emergency going on. Yep. There are still people that can't find housing, and they keep saying that, oh, shelter bed, this and that. Well, I want to kind of just quickly cover the fact that one of the things, as especially as a female, trying to get into a shelter. Shelters are mostly, when we're talking about women and stuff, it's mostly you either got to be fleeing domestic abuse, you have to have children that are in your care, or both. And other than that, the shelter spaces available for women are in co-ed places, which, especially with my disabilities, I don't feel comfortable putting myself in a position where I can experience the kind of sexual violence that goes on in there. I've tried to take people to certain ones. There's a gentleman I picked up one time, and I said, he was way far away from any kind of shelter. And I said, well, where do you want to go? Do you want to go to the Calgary drop-in center? He's like, no. I mean, he just lost it. He was like, I'd rather freeze to death. And then I said, well, what about the mustard seed? And I have to say, the mustard seed, Nixon family, hello, that was not a first choice for him. We were lucky to get him into the Salvation Army Center for Hope. And he was so thrilled. He gave me the biggest hug. Because I was willing to drive him there. And he was actually afraid to get into my car because he had this staph infection on his hands, and and I said, I don't care. I can sanitize it later. Get in my freaking car. I'm taking you we're going to find a place for you. But that's the reality. It's much easier to find a male or male identifying person a place in a shelter than it is to find women places in shelters. And if you're a full-on family that's experiencing homelessness, there are no shelters that allow for families. Like if you're a mom and dad with a bunch of with 2 kids, they separate you up if they can even find a space. And so I just have to plug that out there. We still are in. I found housing. I'm in a safe place, but I've been lucky because I'm industrious and you've given me a voice, which helped a lot. And I was able to find, but not so many people aren't as lucky as I am, and not as industrious, and they're just too busy surviving, and we need to care about those people because, the majority of the new homelessness and these encampments, but I was so close to possibly having to end up in one of those encampments. It was terrifying, and and there's a lot of people that are working people that end up in those encampments. They're not drug addicts. They're not all of the things that we like to, the stereotype that we like to put them in to say, oh, they're these dangerous drug addicts and organized crime. No, it's just regular everyday people like anybody else, and most people, I should say, are only a paycheck away from being in that position. And we really need to, even with everything being bombarded and coming at us in a million different directions with this government, we need to keep our eye on the ball and remember there's still a housing emergency. And that's what I have for tonight.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And you're right. The housing piece has not gone away, and that's one of the problems with this fire hose of problems that we're dealing with, is that it's just nonstop. But I want to thank you, Cassandra, for weighing in. We've got Lynn that I'm going to bring in, and then we've got Sunshiny, and I think we're going to call it a night because we're getting real close to the 2-hour mark again, and I really am trying to stay away from the Lord of the Rings episodes. So, Lynn, what's going on tonight?
Hi, Nate. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. Listen, you haven't been live for a while on Spaces, so I'm going to keep it short, but I don't think there's any unwoke folks on here, but when we were talking about the Morinville trans issues, in 1981, I sold Mary Kay with a guy in Fort McMurray, a lovely young Asian man who was transitioning in 1981. He worked at Suncor. The ladies wouldn't let him into their washrooms, locker rooms, and the men wouldn't let him into theirs. So Suncor actually built him his own locker room. So this is not a new thing. He did it back then, and he transitioned, got married, did all that. Anyway, and then this week they took off any information for sexual education. So any young person looking for anything to do with sexual education on the Alberta Health websites or whatever they had them on, that's gone.
I think that's not... see, this is a tough one because I know that Janice Irwin tweeted out that they had been removed at the instruction of the provincial government. And this is where it's so frustrating with the current climate that we have right now, because it appears that what happened was there was a Twitter account that was designated for particularly through AHS, and I got to be clear, I'm just speaking for myself here, not for any organizations that may or may not be affiliated with, but there was a Twitter account for AHS that was specific to the sexual health piece, and it was deleted. AHS did release a statement where they said, yeah, no, we've been consolidating some of our social media.
Okay.
But that being said, this cuts both ways, because we have seen that the provincial government has, and I'll use the vaccination stuff as an example, where they had the word COVID removed from a lot of the materials at the direction of the ministry. We do exist in a space right now where it is as equally plausible that this could be being done, because the ministry did say, yeah, we're going to shut that down. So like, it's the frustrating, we've had a couple people on the team who have been kind of trying to sort through the whole thing. And the frustrating thing is, because of the way that this government conducts itself, We're actually going to be tomorrow filing a FOIP to find out what were the reasons and what was the communication around this Twitter account being removed, because there's no way to know. The government has interfered in the communications that AHS has used with the population before. We know that demonstrably. It's entirely within the realm of possibility that they could have done it again. And I just resent the hell out of the fact that this is the climate that we're in, where there's no way to know for sure. So I take your point.
No, and I mean, it fits in with them not wanting to have any of this in schools, right? So
100%.
In in the 70s, let's say 74, 75, I had to go into a hospital where all of the hockey family lived. So I lived in the next town to Viking. And while I was in there, a girl had a baby. And a boy came in, and I was like, what's going on? Like, I mean, this is small town Alberta. And another girl said, oh, well, he's the father. And I said, what do you mean he's the father? He's the father of 2 other kids. So without the sexual education that we didn't receive in the town of Viking in the 70s, maybe early 80s, Alberta Health came in and documented these children because so many fathers had impregnated different women that it was basically what I do is genealogy, to make sure that these children didn't marry each other when they got to be teenagers. That's what non-sexual health education brings to us. And maybe that's not a big story anymore, but it was a big story when we grew up because there were so many girls who had kids with the same father. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say, except if you could please delete your Patreon and use Buy Me a Coffee, because Patreon supports Russia. And so they're shutting down so many Ukrainian YouTubers, demonetizing them, that we're trying to get people to go to Buy Me a Coffee.
I'll go look this up. I'll see what I can see. I will commit to that for sure. And I just want to say to your point, thank you. And I want to say to your point, I'm looking here, just as you were talking, I was doing a quick little Google thinger. And from the government of Alberta themselves, and this goes towards when we started to see more and more sex ed happening in classrooms and the content of that sex ed happening in classrooms. Between 2001 and 2012, the teen pregnancy rate dropped from 44 to 32 per 1,000 women aged 15 to 19. So education, information helps.
Absolutely.
There we go. And I have homework. So thank you for that.
I hope you can find something about it. But anyway, I lived it, so I know what happened.
Yeah, no. And I remember, like, when I was in the 80s and the 90s, when I was in the junior highs and the high schools, I remember that there were kids in my classes who were leaving for a year, and then they would come back. So I haven't been in high school for a little bit of time, so I don't know what's happening right now.
Well, back then it was rampant in Viking, Alberta, home of the Sutters.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Have a good night.
You as well. I'm going to bring in Sunshiny for our final caller of the evening, and then we're going to wrap things up. Sunshiny, what's going on? And this is where I do you have to unmute your mic part of the show. And maybe we don't get to have Sunshiny tonight. Okay. Yeah, I think we may not actually have Sunshiny. So all of that being said, I'm going to do the wrap up and do the plugs of the things and the stuffs. So to start with, friendly reminder, we do still have our merch. We're still operating in conjunction with the good folks at abpoly.ca. You can get the hoodies, you can get the mugs. I really do. I know that it's not the biggest ticket item, but I do love the mugs. I have my coffee out of that regularly. They've got the T-shirts, and they still have the cuffed beanies, which, even though the weather is still getting nicer, makes an excellent fashion choice. So you should think about getting one if you want to. So there's my incredibly awkward. I'm so bad at selling junk. It's really quite embarrassing. But a couple other things that I want to plug real quick before I plug awkwardly our Patreon page. Big thing that I want. Okay, I don't know what just happened. We got Sunshiny back, and it sounds like the car that she's in maybe is getting stolen. So I hope she's okay. That was interesting. Before I plug the Patreon, I want to talk a little bit about a couple of the episodes that we have coming up this week, because with the NDP Leadership Race, we are continuing with this new pattern thing that we got going on, where we're going to be dropping episodes on Wednesdays and Fridays, as well as doing the live shows on Sundays, or at least presenting an interview on Sundays. So on Wednesday, we've got us a conversation. I sat down yesterday with none other than former Minister of Education, former Deputy Premier, former MLA, Thomas Lukasik. And we did us a bit of a post-mortem on the whole RCMP press conference and the investigation and as well as a bunch of other issues. We talk about the NDP leadership race. We talk about the situation with the UCP right now. We cover a whole lot of ground in that conversation. That conversation is going to be going up for our Patreon supporters tomorrow evening. And then it'll be going live on Wednesday. But we also have another conversation that we're going to be presenting on Friday. And it's kind of a jarring little conversation. When we sit down with a couple of members from the Edmonton Public School Advocacy Network and their response to the provincial budget. And it's very bad. It's bad. But it's a critically important conversation, and there are some ways that you can help them do what they're trying to do. So would strongly encourage you to watch out for that episode. That'll be going live to the public on Friday. It'll be up a couple of days earlier for our Patreon supporters as well, which gives me the space for the Patreon plug. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, we'd love nothing more than if you signed up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/TheBreakdownAB, where for just a little bit of money, you can help us continue to produce the kind of content that we do, and you can tell your favorite UCP politicians that you are supporting the breakdown, because we do have there's costs with doing this thing. We do the FOIPs, we do the streaming and all of that. So every little bit helps. If you can't, we totally get that. We know that there are a lot of people who follow the show and who watch the show who simply do not have the financial means. There is an affordability crisis in this province right now. So if you can't, that's cool. There's everything that we put on Patreon eventually becomes public. So we're not going to do like the whole paywall-y thing, because that's not cool. It doesn't make conversations happen. So if you can't afford it, that's cool. But if you could do the like and the share, and if you're watching on the YouTubes, smash that subscribe button, as the kids say. I'm told that's what the kids say. I don't actually know, but that's what I'm going to go with. So if you can't do that, then you can do that there. Busy week is what I'm trying to say at the end of the day. We got a lot coming up, and we're going to continue to have a couple more interviews with more NDP leadership candidates as we go through the thing. And we've got a special little project that we're in the early stages of trying to sort out. And this is where we could use some feedback from all of the listeners, all of the viewers. If the breakdown was to try to put on a leadership debate for the NDP candidates, not an official party one, but a breakdown style one, is that something that you could get behind? Is that something that you think that you could encourage candidates to get behind? We're still kind of mapping out the format, but we had a creative meeting last night, and it's something that we're thinking that we might try to pursue. So if that's something that you'd like, send us a DM, let us know, tweet at us, no, that sounds weird. Tweet at us. And we're going to see if we can set something up like that in the coming weeks. All of that being said, Big thank you to everybody who watched live tonight. Big thank you to everybody who listened live tonight. If you're listening to the podcast version, go ahead, leave us a rating, little review. All of those things help us to get the podcast into more ears. And if you're watching the YouTube, like I said, like and subscribe. And that's all we got for tonight, folks. Thank you so much. We managed to keep it to right about the 2-hour mark. We'll be back with another live show next weekend, hopefully. But in the meantime and in between time, as always, keep the conversation going.